I read an article about sleepwalking, and oddly enough, it's becoming more and more a subject because of sleeping pills. But there are some people who are natural sleepwalkers. And then I read more and was really fascinated because in the United States, there are two men in prison for the rest of their lives. One killed his wife, and the other in laws, people whom they loved very much. They would never have committed those crimes in their normal situation because a sleepwalker may perceive someone as the enemy. In Canada, there are two men who were acquitted in the same kind of crime because the court felt they would never have committed those crimes if they had been in full possession of their faculties. And I thought, my God, that's fascinating. And I always go to suppose, what if, and why. Suppose a man is accused of murdering a young girl 20 years ago, then accused or believed to have murdered his pregnant wife, and he marries, and very shortly after, the body of the first girl shows up on his property. And I thought, now we're getting warm. So who are these people? What do I want them to be? What's the name of the book? And that's how I got into the title. I always use titles, or almost always, song titles or a line from a song in my book. And since I deal with memory, and his very vague memory of the disappearance of the girl, I thought I heard that song before. It resonated with me. And then I thought it will play into the memory of the young woman who becomes his wife. She's 28 to his 42. He's very, very wealthy, in the biggest house in town, in the Carrington Mansion. And I thought it shouldn't be just a house. It ought to be a house with a history. It had been in Wales, built in Wales, in the 1600s. It even had a priest room, because when Queen Elizabeth went back to the throne and when Oliver Cromwell was there, they started to get rid of the Catholics because they felt they were against the throne. And many priests were slaughtered at that time. So the Catholics would build a priest room in their castles. So this house has a priest room. And the little girl, 6 years old, sneaks up because she wants to see it. Her father is the landscaper. And hears people coming and drops between the pews and hides. And she hears a quarrel that has everything to do with the deaths that occur both that night and 20 years later. And I thought, that's interesting. That's interesting. We use memory in the story. We use her as a child, and then 22 years later, at age 28, going to the owner of the house, who's 42, and saying, please let us have a charity event here for literacy. And 4 months later, she marries him. She's a librarian. She's interested in literacy because I've done lawyers, I've done journalists, television people, because you really want to have someone who's able to say there's something wrong with this solution, or I don't believe that person. So I like to have someone, in this case, someone who's very well read and fascinated by the story of what had happened in the Carrington house and the girl who was disappeared 20 years ago. So I think she's a librarian. That way she can go and say, for a literacy event, please let us use your home. We'll get so many more people interested if you'll let us use it. But then I thought I'd also like her to live in New York. It makes her a little more cosmopolitan. I don't think that she would be living with her grandmother who raised her. So she's got her own little digs in New York. And actually, I borrowed the apartment of a friend of mine who has this marvelous small apartment in the West Side. And I thought that's good because it opens her up to having great interest in the theater, having a boyfriend who wasn't that serious. Neither one of them were that serious about each other. And then she falls madly in love with Peter Carrington. And also, I chose Englewood, New Jersey, because I've always been fascinated by it. It's where the Lindbergh family lived. And from the time I was a little kid, I was hearing about the Lindbergh baby, the golden child of the world's most famous man. His first baby was kidnapped and then found dead. And if only they had gone back to Englewood that night, where there was a lot of help and a lot of protection, instead of staying overnight in Hopewell, New Jersey, at their new country home, the baby might still be now an 80-year-old man. So there was something like that. So that always fascinated me, and I've always felt that they never really got the full truth of that case. How did Bruno Hoffman know to go put the ladder to that window and go there the only time the baby was alone, when the nanny went for her dinner and before the mother and father were back upstairs? The only time that that baby would have been alone. They've never solved that case to my satisfaction. I thought it gives a little more panache. It's not just another suburban town. It's a town with a history, the history of a crime. And now the second crime, the disappearance of the ambassador's daughter, is the second crime that has been left open for answers for 20 years.